Billionaire goes to his son's grave and discovers a waitress crying with a child. Before starting the story, say in the comments where you're watching this video from. The rain fell in fine droplets on the black marble of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, creating a melancholy melody that seemed to resonate with Richard Harrington's broken heart. His fine leather Italian shoes slipped slightly on the paved paths as he walked with a heavy step toward the most prestigious section of the cemetery, where his only son, Ryan, rested. At 72 years old, Richard was one of the richest men in America, the owner of a financial empire that spanned 3 continents. But all his fortune could do nothing against the pain that had been gnawing at him for 3 years now. Ryan's funeral monument stood majestically among the other graves, a Carrara marble sculpture representing a young man with fine features, his arms open toward the sky. Richard had called upon the best sculptor in the country to immortalize his son, who died tragically in a car accident at the age of 25. Every week, without exception, Richard came to reflect at this grave, bringing white roses, Ryan's favorite flowers, and talking to his son as if he were still alive, telling him about business and the important decisions he had to make, desperately seeking advice that would never come. That morning, something unusual caught his attention. A female silhouette was kneeling before Ryan's grave, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beside her, a small boy of about 5 years old played quietly with a small red truck, unaware of his mother's distress. The woman wore a wrinkled waitress uniform, and her brown hair was tied in a messy bun. Richard stopped short, surprised to discover someone else at his son's grave. If you enjoy this story so far, feel free to leave a like to encourage me to continue. And tell me in the comments, what do you think of this mysterious encounter at the cemetery? "Excuse me, ma'am," Richard said in a soft but firm voice, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child. The woman started and turned quickly, revealing a face marked by tears and fatigue. Her green eyes were reddened by crying, and Richard could see she was young, probably in her 30s. "I am sorry to disturb you, but this is my son's grave." The waitress rose hurriedly, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Oh, Mr. Harrington, I am truly sorry. I didn't know you came so early." Her voice trembled slightly, and Richard noticed that she knew his name. "My name is Sarah Thompson. I knew Ryan." The little boy looked up at Richard, and the latter felt his heart skip a beat. The child had the same piercing blue eyes as Ryan, the same face shape, the same brown curls falling over his forehead. The resemblance was so striking that Richard had to lean against a neighboring tombstone so as not to lose his balance. "What is your name, my boy?" Richard asked in a choked voice, kneeling to get down to the child's level. "Tyler," the little boy replied with an innocent smile. "Mom says Dad is in heaven and that he's watching us." "Is that true, sir?" Sarah turned visibly pale and took her son's hand. "Tyler, we have to go now. Say goodbye to the gentleman." But Richard could not look away from the child. Every feature, every expression reminded him of Ryan at the same age. "Wait," he said, standing up, his heart pounding. "Please don't leave. I would like to understand. How did you know my son?" Sarah hesitated, looking alternately at Richard and Tyler. She seemed to be struggling with herself, as if she had to make a crucial decision. Finally, she sighed deeply. "Mr. Harrington, there are things you don't know about Ryan, things he never had the chance to tell you." The rain began to fall harder, and Richard took an umbrella from his leather briefcase. Without a word, he opened it over Sarah and Tyler. "Listen, it's cold and damp here. What would you say to having a coffee somewhere warm? I would really like to hear what you have to tell me." Sarah looked at Tyler, who was starting to shiver despite his little coat. She nodded reluctantly. "All right, but not for long. I have to be at work in 2 hours." They headed toward the cemetery exit, Richard holding the umbrella firmly while Sarah held Tyler's hand. The silence was heavy, each lost in their thoughts. Richard couldn't help but steal furtive glances at the child, looking for other resemblances to his deceased son. Once out of the cemetery, Richard hailed a taxi. "To the Russian tea room, please," he told the driver. During the journey, Tyler looked with wonder at the large New York buildings passing by the window, asking his mother 1,000 questions about the monuments he saw. Sarah answered patiently, but Richard could see she was tense, her hands trembling slightly. The Russian tea room was one of Ryan's favorite places when he was a student. Richard was a regular there and was greeted warmly by the headwaiter, who seated them at a discreet table near the window. Tyler was immediately fascinated by the atmosphere of the cafe. The servers in white aprons weaving between tables, the smell of freshly ground coffee, and pastries coming out of the oven. "A black coffee for me," Richard ordered. "And for you, Mrs. Thompson?" "A tea, please, and a hot chocolate for Tyler if possible." Richard nodded to the server and turned to Sarah. "Now, tell me, how did you know Ryan?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands encircling her teacup, as if to draw strength from it. "I met Ryan 6 years ago. I was working in a small diner near the university where he gave finance lectures. He often came to lunch there, always alone, always immersed in his books or files." Richard frowned. He knew Ryan taught at the university sometimes, but he thought it was just to keep busy, not something important. "He never told me about this diner." "Ryan was different from what people imagined," Sarah continued, a nostalgic smile on her lips. "Everyone saw him as the son of the great Richard Harrington, heir to a considerable fortune. But he just wanted to be treated like anyone else. At the diner, nobody knew who he really was. He always paid in cash, never made a scene, and was polite to everyone." "And you fell in love with him," Richard said, more as a statement than a question. Sarah blushed slightly. "It wasn't planned. At first it was just sympathy. He looked so lonely, so sad sometimes. Then we started talking. He told me about his studies, his passion for teaching, his dreams. He wanted to start a foundation to help young people from underprivileged neighborhoods get access to financial education." This revelation hit Richard like a punch. Ryan had never spoken to him about his projects. In fact, now that he thought about it, his son and he rarely discussed personal things. Their conversations always revolved around business, the family company, and the responsibilities that awaited him. "Continue," Richard whispered, suddenly aware that he was discovering a Ryan he had never known. "We grew closer bit by bit. Ryan would pick me up after my shift. We would walk through the city. We talked about everything and nothing. He was intelligent, funny, generous, but he also carried a huge weight on his shoulders. He felt trapped by the expectations you had for him." Richard felt a dull pain in his chest. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, looking at Tyler, who was quietly drawing on a paper napkin. "He told me he felt like he was living the life you had planned for him, not the one he really wanted. He respected your work, your success, but he dreamed of other things. He wanted to teach, to help people, to make a difference in the world in ways other than managing millions of dollars." These words resonated painfully in Richard's mind. He now remembered certain conversations with Ryan, moments when his son seemed to want to tell him something important, but when he himself was too busy with business to really listen. "And Tyler?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible. Is he Ryan's son?" Sarah closed her eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes, Tyler is your grandson." Richard's world seemed to stop. Around them, the life of the cafe continued. The conversations, the clinking of cups, the laughter of customers. But for him, nothing existed but this revelation that changed everything. He had a grandson. Ryan's blood flowed through the veins of this little blue-eyed boy who was innocently coloring his napkin. "Why? Why did Ryan never tell me?" Richard stammered, tears in his eyes. "Because he was afraid," Sarah replied softly. "Afraid of your reaction. Afraid you would think he had wasted his life. Afraid you wouldn't want to accept Tyler because I am just a simple waitress." He had planned to tell you. "You know, the weekend the accident happened, he was supposed to come see you to explain everything." Richard felt his legs give way beneath him. Ryan had died on his way to talk to him about his son, his happiness, his real life. And he had known nothing, understood nothing. For 3 years he had mourned his son while completely ignoring the existence of his grandson. Sir, are you okay? Tyler asked, looking up from his drawing. You're crying like mommy when she looks at pictures of daddy. Richard quickly wiped his tears and smiled at the child. Yes, my little one, I'm okay. I'm just very moved. Can you show me your drawing? Tyler proudly handed him his napkin. He had drawn a house with 3 characters in front. A tall one, a medium one, and a small one. It's Daddy, Mommy, and me, he explained. Mommy says Daddy is watching us from heaven. So I drew him with wings. Richard looked at the drawing, his heart tight, the child's innocence, his natural way of speaking about his deceased father. All of it overwhelmed him deeply. It's a very beautiful drawing, Tyler. You are very talented. Thank you. Mommy says I draw well like Daddy. He was always drawing plans for his school. His school? Richard turned to Sarah. Ryan had bought a small building in Queens, Sarah explained. He wanted to create a free financial education center for struggling youth there. He worked on it every weekend, redrawing the plans, calculating the costs. It was his heart's project. Another revelation hit Richard full force. Not only was he discovering he had a grandson, but he was also learning that his son had had projects, dreams, and a vision of the future that he had never shared with him. What happened to this project after the accident? He asked. Sarah looked down. The building was sold. I didn't have the means to continue the payments, and legally I had no rights since Ryan and I weren't married. Everything he owned went back to his estate. Richard realized with horror that he had probably, without knowing it, sold his son's dream. In managing Ryan's estate, he had liquidated several real estate properties that he considered unimportant investments. Sarah, he said in a trembling voice. I am sorry. I didn't know. If I had known about Tyler, about your difficulties. I am not asking you for anything, Mr. Harrington, Sarah interrupted firmly. I manage very well on my own. I work hard. Tyler goes to public school. We have a small apartment. We get by. But Richard could see it wasn't that simple. Sarah's clothes were clean but worn. Tyler's shoes had been repaired several times. And there was that particular fatigue in their eyes from those who fight every day to make ends meet. Do you come to Ryan's grave often? Richard asked. Every Sunday, Sarah replied. It's the only day I don't work. I tell Tyler what his daddy did. I show him photos. I explain that even if Daddy is no longer here, he loved him very much. And Tyler, what does he know exactly? He knows his daddy was a good person, that he helped people, that he taught children how to be smart with money. I told him Daddy had a family but that they didn't know us. Richard felt a new wave of guilt wash over him. For 3 years, this child had grown up without knowing his paternal family, without benefiting from the love and support he should have received. Sarah, I would like to be part of Tyler's life and yours too. You are the family Ryan chose. That makes you my family as well. Sarah shook her head. Mr. Harrington, that's kind, but we come from very different worlds. I don't want Tyler to grow up thinking he can have everything without effort. Ryan told me about your wealth, your lifestyle. That's not what I want for my son. But he's my grandson. Richard cried louder than he intended. A few heads turned toward their table. Excuse me, he said, lowering his voice. It's just that Tyler is all I have left of Ryan. Please, don't deprive me of the chance to know him. Sarah looked at Richard for a long time, seeming to weigh the pros and cons. What exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet. I'm discovering all of this today. But I'd like to start by getting to know Tyler, spending time with him, talking to him about his father, maybe helping with his education. I can pay for his studies myself, Sarah said with pride. I don't doubt it. But why deprive yourself of means that could make his life easier? Ryan would have wanted his son to have every possible chance. Tyler, who had been listening to part of the conversation without really understanding, raised his hand like at school. Can I say something? Richard and Sarah turned to him. Of course, sweetheart, Sarah said. The gentleman, he knew Daddy. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Tyler, he's He's your daddy's daddy. Tyler's eyes widened in surprise. So he's my grandpa. The child's simplicity took Richard's breath away. Yes, Tyler, I am your grandfather. I didn't know you existed, otherwise I would have come to see you much sooner. Tyler thought for a moment, then smiled. So now we can see each other? I always wanted to have a grandpa like the other kids at school. Sarah felt her defenses crumble before her son's innocent enthusiasm. She also saw the sincere emotion in Richard's eyes, the way he looked at Tyler as if he were the most beautiful treasure in the world. All right, she said finally. We can try. But I have conditions. What are they? Richard asked, ready to accept anything. First, Tyler continues his normal life. Public school, simple activities, no display of wealth. Second, if at any moment you decide it's too complicated or you grow tired, you disappear cleanly without hurting Tyler. And third, you respect my decisions regarding his upbringing. Richard nodded vigorously. Accepted. And I have a condition too. Sarah looked at him with suspicion. Which is? That you let me help you a little. Not out of charity, but because you are the mother of my grandson and Ryan loved you. He would have wanted you to be happy and safe. Sarah felt tears rising to her eyes. Since Ryan's death, she had carried the weight of Tyler's upbringing alone, sometimes working 2 jobs to make ends meet, depriving herself of everything so her son would lack nothing. I don't know, she murmured. I've always been independent. Ryan was independent too, Richard said softly. But sometimes, accepting help is also a form of strength. And besides, Tyler has the right to know his heritage, his family history. They remained silent for a moment, each absorbed by the enormity of this encounter that changed everything. Tyler, unaware of the gravity of what was playing out, continued to draw, now creating a new picture with 4 characters. Now we are a real family, he declared joyfully. Richard felt his heart swell with an emotion he hadn't felt since Ryan's death. Hope. For the first time in 3 years, he had something to look forward to. Someone to fight for. A reason to smile. Sarah, he said, would you agree to have dinner with me tonight? All 3 of us? I'd like to learn more about Tyler, about his life, about what he likes. Sarah looked at her son, who was nodding his head energetically. All right, but somewhere simple. Tyler is only 5. He won't last in a gourmet restaurant. How about a pizzeria, Tyler? Richard suggested. Do you like pizza? I love pizza, especially the cheese kind, the little boy exclaimed. Richard smiled, remembering that Ryan also loved pizza when he was little. Some things were passed down from generation to generation, even through death and absence. They finished their drinks talking about lighter things. Tyler told about his class, his friends, his teacher whom he liked very much. Richard hung on his every word, trying to catch up on 5 years of absence. Sarah observed this first interaction between her son and his grandfather, with a mix of apprehension and tenderness. When the time came for Sarah to go to work, Richard offered to take them back. I can drop you off at your work and take Tyler to his sitter or daycare. Tyler goes to Mrs. Garcia, our neighbor, Sarah explained. She watches several kids in the neighborhood. It's cheaper than a real daycare. In the taxi taking them toward the Bronx, Richard discovered a New York he knew little of. The working-class buildings, the small neighborhood shops, the simple and authentic life that was so far removed from his usual world. Sarah's building was old but well-maintained on a quiet tree-lined street. That's where I live with Mommy, Tyler said proudly, pointing to a 3rd-floor window. We have a little balcony where Mommy grows flowers. Richard looked at the window and tried to imagine his grandson's life behind that modest facade. The school mornings, the homework in the evening, the bedtime stories, all those precious moments he had missed. What time do you finish work? He asked Sarah. Around 8 p.m. The diner closes late. Then I will pick you up around 8:15 p.m. for dinner. Does that suit you? Sarah nodded. We'll be ready. Richard watched Sarah and Tyler disappear into the building, then asked the driver to take him back to his office. Throughout the journey, He couldn't help but think back to this extraordinary morning that had turned his life upside down. In the space of a few hours, he had gone from a lonely morning man to a loving grandfather. Arriving at his office at the top of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, Richard had trouble concentrating on his files. His thoughts kept returning to Tyler, to his blue eyes so similar to Ryan's, to his innocent smile, to the natural way he had accepted him as a grandfather. He summoned his personal assistant, Michael, a trusted man who had worked for him for 15 years. "Michael, I need you to do some discreet research on a certain Sarah Thompson. She works as a waitress. She has a 5-year-old son named Tyler. I want to know exactly where she works, her financial situation, her background. But be careful, stay discreet. I don't want her to feel followed." Michael, accustomed to his boss's sometimes unexpected requests, nodded without question. "Very well, sir. You will have this information tomorrow morning." Richard spent the rest of the day in a state of agitation he didn't recognize in himself. He canceled his afternoon appointments, unable to focus on current business. Instead, he went to a large toy store, completely lost amidst the colorful aisles. What could a 5-year-old boy possibly like? He ended up buying some storybooks, colored pencils, and a small puzzle, telling himself it was better to start slowly. At 7 p.m., Richard was already on his way to the diner where Sarah worked. He had chosen a family pizzeria in Queens, a warm and unpretentious place where Tyler would feel at ease. When he arrived in front of Sarah's building, she was already waiting with Tyler. The child had changed clothes, and now wore a little blue sweater that brought out his eyes. Sarah had traded her waitress uniform for a simple but elegant dress, and Richard was struck by her natural beauty. "Grandpa!" Tyler shouted, running toward him. The word rang like a melody in Richard's ears. "Hello, my big guy. Did you have a good afternoon?" "Great. I told Mrs. Garcia that I had a grandpa now. She said I was lucky." During the ride to the pizzeria, Tyler chatted nonstop, telling 1,000 anecdotes about his day, his friends, his school. Richard listened religiously, carving every detail into his memory. Sarah, more silent, observed this budding interaction with a mix of joy and concern. The pizzeria was perfect, relaxed atmosphere. Welcoming staff, and Tyler was delighted to be able to choose his pizza from a menu with pictures. "I'll have the margarita with olives," he declared after mature reflection. While Tyler colored on the paper placemats the server had brought, Sarah and Richard were finally able to talk more seriously. "Tell me about Ryan," Richard asked. "What was he like with Tyler?" Sarah's face lit up. "He was wonderful, very patient, very gentle. He spent hours playing with Tyler, reading him stories, explaining the world. Tyler adored him. Even now, he still talks about when Daddy was here." "And you, Sarah, how are you really managing?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's hard sometimes. I work 6 days a week. I do a few hours of cleaning extra in the mornings. Fortunately, Mrs. Garcia helps me a lot with Tyler, and the other moms in the neighborhood too. We help each other." "Which diner do you work at?" "The Corner Diner in the Bronx. It's a family place. The bosses are kind, but you know how it is in food service. The hours are difficult, tips vary." Richard nodded, beginning to understand Sarah's daily life. "And for the future, do you have projects, dreams?" Sarah smiled sadly. "My dreams are for Tyler to grow up happy and to be able to study. I've been saving since he was born for his future education. For me, I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I'd like to resume my studies. I had started a training course in accounting before getting pregnant, but it's complicated with Tyler and work." "Did Ryan know?" "Yes, he always encouraged me to go back to school. He said he would help me, that we find a solution. And then the accident happened," Richard finished softly. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "Everything collapsed at once. I lost the man I loved, the father of my son, and all our plans for the future." Richard reached out and gently placed his fingers on Sarah's. "Sarah, I cannot bring Ryan back. but I can help you realize some of your projects. And I can be there for Tyler. Look! Tyler cried, holding up his coloring. I drew our dinner. He had depicted 3 characters around a round table with giant pizzas in front of each of them. That's you, Grandpa. That's Mommy and that's me. Richard took the drawing with emotion. It's magnificent, Tyler. You are truly an artist. Can I keep it? Of course. That way you can remember our first dinner together. The server brought the pizzas and Tyler began to eat with appetite, telling his school adventures between bites. He explained to Richard how he had learned to write his name, how he already knew how to count to 100, and how he sometimes helped his teacher distribute notebooks. You are smart, my boy, Richard said with pride. Exactly like your daddy. Mommy always tells me Daddy was very smart. She says he knew everything about numbers and money. It's true. And you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Tyler thought seriously, a smear of tomato sauce at the corner of his mouth. I want to be a school teacher like Daddy, but also a fireman to save people and also a doctor to heal Mommy's boo-boos when she's tired. Sarah smiled tenderly, wiping her son's face. Tyler wants to save the whole world, she explained to Richard. That is a noble goal, Richard replied. And you know what, Tyler? To save the world, you first have to study well at school. I know. Mommy always tells me that too. After dinner, Richard suggested a walk along the East River. Tyler was fascinated by the illuminated, sightseeing boats passing under the bridges. And he bombarded Richard with questions about the monuments they glimpsed. Richard discovered with pleasure his role as a grandfather, the simple joy of sharing knowledge with a curious child. Grandpa, do you live in a castle? Tyler suddenly asked. Richard smiled. No, my little one, I live in a large apartment, but it's not a castle. Why? Because Mommy told me you were very rich. So I thought rich people lived in castles. Sarah blushed. Tyler, one doesn't ask those kinds of things. It doesn't matter, Richard reassured her. Tyler, it's true that I have money, but you know, money doesn't necessarily make you happy. What makes me happy now is being with you and your mommy. Then why were you sad at the cemetery this morning? The child's direct question hit Richard right in the heart. Because I miss your daddy very much. But now that I found you, I'm less sad. You remind me of many beautiful things about him. They sat on a bench facing the illuminated Brooklyn Bridge. Tyler, tired from this day rich in emotion, snuggled against Richard. This simple and natural gesture overwhelmed the billionaire, who hadn't felt such innocent tenderness in years. Sarah, he said softly, I'd like to ask you an important question. Would you agree to let me take care of Tyler's education? Not to take him away from you, but so he has every possible chance. Sarah pursed her lips. What exactly do you mean by that? A good private school, tutoring if he needs it, extracurricular activities, educational trips, everything Ryan would have wanted for his son. Tyler is doing very well in his public school, Sarah replied firmly. He has friends, he's flourishing. I don't say otherwise, but why not offer him the best? And you, Sarah, why not resume your studies? I could help you financially during your training. Sarah stood up abruptly, waking Tyler, who was dozing. Mr. Harrington, I think you don't understand. I don't want your money. I manage very well on my own. It's not charity, Sarah. Tyler is my grandson. He has a right to his heritage. Mommy, why are you arguing? Tyler asked in a small, worried voice. Sarah took her son in her arms. We aren't arguing, sweetheart. We're just discussing. Richard approached gently. Sarah, forgive me. I've never been used to children. I have a tendency to want to solve everything with money. But what I really want is just to be part of your life, at your pace, on your terms. Sarah looked at Richard for a long time, searching for sincerity in his eyes. All right, but we start slowly. Regular visits so Tyler learns to know you. The rest we'll see later. That suits me perfectly. They went home in a taxi, Tyler asleep between the two of them. Richard carried the child up to Sarah's apartment, discovering a small, warm cocoon decorated with care despite limited means. Tyler's drawings were posted everywhere on the walls, and photos of Ryan sat prominently on the shelves. "Thank you for this evening," Sarah whispered while tucking Tyler into his little bed. "He had a wonderful time." "Me too," Richard replied. "It's been a long time since I've been this happy." Leaving, Richard discreetly slipped an envelope into Sarah's mailbox. It wasn't much, just enough to help her with the week's groceries, but he hoped she would accept it. The following days passed quickly. Richard completely changed his habits. Instead of working late into the evening, he finished earlier to call Sarah and Tyler. He had installed Skype on his computer. And Tyler loved their video calls where he showed his drawings and told his grandfather about his day. On Wednesday evening, Richard proposed picking Tyler up from school. "I could take him to the park and we would meet you after your work." Sarah hesitated, then accepted. Tyler was overjoyed at the idea of spending the afternoon with his grandfather. Richard arrived in front of the local primary school with a nervousness he didn't recognize. When the bell rang and the children ran out, he looked for Tyler among the crowd. He spotted him quickly, recognizable by his brown curls and his little red backpack. "Grandpa!" Tyler shouted, throwing himself into his arms. "Hello, my boy. Did you have a good day?" "Super. I got a good grade in math. Look." Tyler proudly pulled a notebook from his backpack with a big "very good" written in red. Richard felt an immense pride wash over him, as if his grandson's successes were his own. They headed toward the neighborhood park, Tyler trotting joyfully beside Richard and telling him 1,000 anecdotes about his classmates. At the park, Richard discovered the simple joys of pushing his grandson on the swing, watching him climb on the playground, sharing a snack on a bench. "Grandpa, were you sad before knowing me?" Tyler suddenly asked, biting into his biscuit. "Very sad, my little one. I missed your daddy tremendously. And now? Now I am happy because I found a part of him in you." Tyler thought for a moment. "Mommy says Daddy watches over us from heaven. Do you think he's happy we're friends?" Richard felt his throat tighten. "I am certain of it, Tyler. Your daddy wanted us to know each other. He would have been very happy to see us together." When Sarah came to pick them up after her work, she found Richard and Tyler sitting on the grass, looking at clouds and inventing stories about their shapes. This image of closeness touched her deeply. "We had so much fun, Mommy," Tyler exclaimed. "Grandpa taught me how to recognize different clouds, and look what he bought me." He brandished a small book about farm animals. Sarah frowned. "Richard, we said no expensive gifts. It's just a book, Sarah, to develop his curiosity." Sarah sighed but smiled. She could see that Tyler was beaming with happiness, and that this man who intimidated her so much at first was becoming someone important to her son. Weeks passed and a routine set in. Richard would pick Tyler up from school on Wednesdays. They would spend the afternoon together, then meet Sarah for dinner. On Sundays, all three of them went to Ryan's grave, Tyler bringing his latest drawings to leave on the headstone. One Sunday, as they left the cemetery, Tyler asked, "Grandpa, do you want to see where we live? For real, I mean." Richard looked at Sarah, who nodded. "All right, but just for tea." Sarah's apartment was small but impeccably kept. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom. Tyler proudly gave Richard a tour of his bedroom, which he shared with his mother, showing his toys, his books, his drawings. Looking around, Richard was struck by the love that radiated from every detail. Tyler's drawings framed like works of art. The photos of Ryan carefully arranged, the worn but tidy ledger books on a shelf made of boards and bricks. "It's very warm here," Richard said sincerely. "It's small, but it's home," Sarah replied, preparing tea. "Mommy, can we show Grandpa Daddy's album?" Tyler asked. Sarah hesitated, then pulled a photo album from under the coffee table. Richard leafed through it with emotion, discovering a Ryan he had never seen. Ryan smiling with Sarah pregnant. Ryan holding baby Tyler in his arms. Ryan playing at the park with his son. Ryan helping Tyler take his first steps. "He looks so happy," Richard whispered, tears in his eyes. "He was," Sarah confirmed. Despite his worries about your reaction, he was overjoyed to be a father. His worries about my reaction? Sarah sat beside Richard. He was afraid you wouldn't understand his choices. He thought you would judge him for having a child without being married, for settling down with a waitress. My God, Sarah, never would I have. If I had known, I would have been the happiest of grandfathers. He knew it, deep down. That's why he had decided to tell you everything. He always said, Dad is tough in business, but he has a good heart. When he sees Tyler, he will melt. Richard closed the album and looked at Tyler, who was playing quietly on the floor. He was right. I melted the moment I saw him. That evening, Richard went home with a decision made. The next morning, he summoned his notary and his lawyer. I want to modify my will, he announced, and I want to create a trust fund for Tyler Thompson. Mr. Harrington, who is this Tyler Thompson? The notary asked. My grandson, Ryan's son. The two legal men exchanged a surprised look. Richard explained the whole story to them, asking them to prepare the necessary documents to legally recognize Tyler as his heir. We will need DNA tests for everything to be incontestable, the lawyer explained. Of course, but be discreet. I don't want Sarah to feel suspected or humiliated. At the same time, Richard researched Ryan's abandoned project. He tracked down the building his son had bought and discovered it had been sold to a real estate development company. An idea began to germinate in his mind. The following month, for Tyler's birthday, Richard organized a small party in a family restaurant. He had invited some of Tyler's school friends, Mrs. Garcia the neighbor, and Sarah's colleagues from the diner. It was the first time he had participated in a child's birthday, and he was touched to see how popular and loved Tyler was. Grandpa, do you want to see my favorite gift? Tyler asked, weaving through the guests. Of course, my boy. Tyler handed him a drawing he had made in secret. It's you, me, Mommy, and Daddy. We're all together now. In the drawing, 4 characters held hands under a large sun. Ryan was represented with wings, but he was part of the family group. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received, Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. That night, Richard took an important decision. It was time to reveal to Sarah and Tyler who he really was and what he wanted to do for them. The next day, he invited Sarah to lunch while Tyler was at school. Sarah, we must speak seriously. They met in a quiet cafe, and Richard took Sarah's hands in his. Sarah, these last months have been the most beautiful of my life since Ryan's death. Tyler has given me a taste for happiness again, and you've shown me another way to live. Richard, where are you going with this? I want to make things official. I want to legally recognize Tyler as my grandson, create a trust fund for his education, and help you realize your dreams. Sarah withdrew her hands. Richard, we already spoke about this. Listen to me until the end. I found the building Ryan bought for his school project. It's for sale. I want to buy it back and realize his dream. But I need you. Me? But I know nothing about education. You know Ryan. You know his ideas, his values. And you could resume your studies in parallel, learn management, and become the director of this school. It would be a family project, a tribute to Ryan. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, digesting this incredible proposal. It's huge, Richard. I don't know if I'm capable. Ryan believed in you. I believe in you too. And Tyler could grow up knowing his mother realized his father's dream. Tears flowed down Sarah's cheeks. And if I fail? You won't fail. And even if you encounter difficulties, I will be there to support you. We will be a team. Sarah looked at Richard for a long time. She saw in his eyes the same determination Ryan had when he talked about his projects. All right, she said finally. Let's try. Richard smiled, his heart swelling with joy. Really? Really. But I have a condition. Which is? We call the school Ryan Harrington School. His name must be everywhere so that all the children who pass through will know who the man was who had this generous idea. Richard nodded vigorously. It's perfect. Ryan would have been proud. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, Richard describing what he knew of Ryan's ideas, Sarah providing her practical perspective as a mother and a working woman. For the first time in a long time, he spoke of the future with enthusiasm. In the evening, when they announced the news to Tyler, the child exploded with joy. "So mommy's going to have a school like daddy wanted and I can help." "Of course you can help," Richard replied. "You will be our special advisor for children." "And can we put a photo of daddy in the school?" "We will put several photos," Sarah promised, hugging her son. That night, Richard felt as if Ryan were present somewhere and that he approved of their project. His family was finally reunited in a way, and the future opened before them full of promise. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Richard bought back the building and hired the best architects to transform it according to Ryan's original plans. Sarah resigned from the diner and enrolled in an accelerated course in educational management. Tyler, delighted by all these changes, followed the construction work passionately, constantly drawing his vision of the future school. One day, as they visited the construction site, all three of them, Tyler asked, "Grandpa, does Daddy see what we're doing?" Richard knelt to his grandson's level. "I am certain of it, my boy, and I am sure he is very proud of us." "So he's happy we're a real family now?" Richard looked at Sarah, who was smiling at him, then hugged Tyler. "Yes, Tyler, we are a real family now." And for the first time in 3 years, Richard Harrington felt truly at peace. The pain of losing Ryan was still there, but it was now tempered by the love he felt for his grandson and the growing affection he felt for Sarah. Life had regained meaning, and the future looked bright. 6 months after that decision, which changed their lives, the Ryan Harrington School began to take shape. The building in Queens, once abandoned, now rang with the sound of hammers and drills. Richard came every day to supervise the work, most often accompanied by Tyler, who proudly wore a small yellow construction helmet. Sarah, for her part, was proving to be an exceptional student. Her professors at the Institute for Educational Management Training were impressed by her motivation and learning capacity. She, who had never imagined returning to studies after so many years, was discovering a true passion for pedagogy management. "Look, Grandpa," Tyler cried, pointing to a room being fitted out. "That's where the library will be. Mommy says we'll have lots of books about money and business." Richard smiled, looking at his grandson's enthusiasm. Now 6 years old, he had had his birthday the previous month. Tyler already showed a natural curiosity for numbers and projects, exactly like Ryan at his age. "And this room, my boy, do you know what it will be?" Richard asked, pointing to a large room bathed in light. "The computer room. Mommy explained to me that Daddy wanted children to learn to use computers to better understand money." Richard nodded, moved to see how Sarah had managed to pass on Ryan's vision to Tyler. Every detail of the school was thought out according to Ryan's original ideas, enriched by Sarah's practical experience and Richard's financial means. That day, Sarah joined them after her classes, radiant with excitement. Tyler, I have excellent news. I passed my midterm exam with the highest grade in my class." "Bravo, Mommy," Tyler shouted, throwing himself into her arms. "You're the smartest." Richard applauded warmly. "Congratulations, Sarah. Ryan would have been so proud of you." Sarah blushed slightly. Over the months, Richard's compliments were having more and more of an effect on her. She had learned to know the man behind the mask of the ruthless billionaire, and she was discovering someone generous, sensitive, and deeply kind. "I have something else to announce," Sarah continued. "My professors have offered me the chance to do my final internship in an innovative school in Chicago. It's a unique opportunity to observe best practices in financial education." Richard's face darkened slightly. "How long?" 3 months, from January to March. "But we'll be apart for 3 months?" Tyler asked in a small, worried voice. Sarah knelt before her son. "My heart, it's important for our school. The more things I learn, the better I can lead Daddy's school." Richard observed this scene, his heart tight. In a few months, Sarah and Tyler had become his family, his reason for living. The idea of seeing them go, even temporarily, was painful to him. Sarah, he said softly, if you think it's important for your training, then you must go. And Tyler, we can see each other every weekend. I will come to Chicago or you will come to New York. Really, Grandpa? Tyler's eyes lit up. We'll take the plane, of course, and even the train if you prefer. Sarah looked at Richard with gratitude. She knew how much this separation cost him, but he was putting his own feelings aside to support her projects. The weeks that followed were intense. Richard multiplied his moments with Tyler, taking him to the office to show him the business world, explaining in child-friendly words how his company worked. Tyler loved these visits, fascinated by the large offices with a view of the Manhattan skyline, and by the respect everyone showed his grandfather. Michael, Richard said one day to his assistant, I would like you to prepare a special office for Tyler. Nothing ostentatious. Just a small space where he can draw and play when he comes to see me. Right away. Mr. Harrington, should I also provide some educational games? Excellent idea. And order some books on economics for children as well. Tyler is already showing an interest in these questions. Michael, who had seen Richard transform since discovering his grandson, smiled discreetly. The fearsome boss had become a doting grandfather, and the whole company was the better for it. Richard was more relaxed, more human in his professional relations. One evening, as Richard was tucking Tyler into bed, a habit that had developed naturally when he dined at Sarah's, the child asked him a question that deeply troubled him. Grandpa, are you going to marry Mommy? Richard nearly knocked over the glass of water on the nightstand. Why are you asking me that, my boy? Because you look at each other like Daddy and Mommy look at each other in the photos. And Thomas at school, he says that when grown-ups look at each other like that, it means they're going to get married. Richard felt his heart race. It was true that over the months, his feelings for Sarah had evolved. What had begun as gratitude and affection had transformed into something deeper. He admired her strength, her determination, her way of juggling studies, Tyler's upbringing, and the supervision of the school construction. Tyler, you know, grown-ups are more complicated than what Thomas says. But do you like Mommy? Yes, I like her. A lot, even. And does she like you? Richard smiled. You'd have to ask her, my little diplomat. Okay, I'll ask her tomorrow. No! Richard exclaimed a bit too loudly. No, Tyler, those are things grown-ups prefer to say to each other. Tyler nodded seriously. All right. But me, I'd really like it if you were truly part of the family. That way, we'd never be apart. That night, Richard did not sleep. Tyler's innocent words had awakened feelings he preferred to ignore. At 72, did he have the right to dream of a new love story? And above all, could Sarah at 32 be interested in a man his age? The next day, Richard decided to speak to Michael, the only man he entirely trusted. Michael, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, sir. Do you think a man of my age can start over? Michael smiled. Mr. Harrington, if I may, since you've known Miss Thompson and Tyler, you've grown 10 years younger. And the way you look at that lady... May I ask if your feelings are shared? That is exactly what I don't know. Sarah is still young. She has her whole life ahead of her. Why be burdened with an old man? Because that old man gave her back hope, helped her realize her dreams, and loves her son as if he were his own grandson. Mr. Harrington, love has no age. And if I may make an observation, Miss Thompson looks at you with the same tenderness you look at her. These words gave Richard courage. The following weekend, he suggested to Sarah a private evening while Tyler was staying at Mrs. Garcia's. I'd like to take you to a special place, Richard said while picking Sarah up. A place that was important to Ryan. They took Richard's car and drove toward Brooklyn Heights. Ryan told me about this little restaurant, Richard explained, parking in front of a cozy Italian spot with a view of the Manhattan skyline. He said it was his favorite place to think about his projects. The restaurant, nestled in a small street, was the perfect example of New York charm. They sat at a table near the window, and Richard ordered a bottle of Ryan's favorite wine. Richard, Sarah said softly, why did you bring me here? Richard took a deep breath. Because I have something important to tell you. These last months have been extraordinary. You have given me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning with a smile. Sarah felt her heart race. Richard, let me finish, please. I know our situation is complicated. I know I'm 40 years older than you, that our worlds are different. But I can no longer ignore my feelings. Sarah, I have fallen in love with you. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, her eyes shining with tears. Richard, It's so complicated. Because of Ryan partly. Yes, I feel like I'm betraying his memory. And then there's Tyler to consider. He has become so attached to you. If our relationship didn't work, he would suffer terribly. Richard reached out and took Sarah's hand. Sarah, look at me. Do you really think Ryan would have wanted you to stay alone for the rest of your life? He loved you. He wanted your happiness. I know, Sarah whispered. And you, Richard, you make me happier than I've been since Ryan's death. Then what is the problem? Sarah looked up at him. I'm afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of ruining what we've built together. Afraid of not measuring up to your world. My world, Sarah, is now you and Tyler. Nothing else matters. Sarah felt a tear run down her cheek. Richard, I have feelings for you too. I fought against them for months, but I can't do it anymore. Richard felt his heart explode with joy. Really? Really? You are the most generous, the most thoughtful man I know. The way you love Tyler, the way you respect Ryan's memory, the way you encourage me in my projects. How could I not fall in love with a man like you? Richard stood up, walked around the table, and took her in his arms. I love you, Sarah Thompson. Will you let me take care of you and Tyler for the rest of my life? Yes, Sarah whispered against his shoulder. Yes, Richard. They kissed tenderly with the sweetness of two people who had waited a long time for this moment. Around them, the lights of New York sparkled like benevolent stars. We have to tell Tyler, Sarah said when they pulled apart. I have a feeling he's already expecting it. Richard smiled. Last night he asked me if I was going to marry you. And what did you answer? That it was a question I first had to ask you. Sarah laughed, her heart light for the first time in months. And are you asking me that question? Richard took Sarah's hand and raised it to his lips. Sarah Thompson, will you marry me? Yes, Richard Harrington. 1,000 times yes. The next morning, they announced the news to Tyler, who exploded with joy. I knew it. I knew it. Now we'll truly be a family. Can I call Richard Papa Richard? Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. If you want to, my boy, nothing would make me happier. Papa Richard, Tyler shouted, throwing himself into Richard's arms. Wait until I tell everyone at school. Thomas is going to be jealous. Me, I have a daddy in heaven and a Papa Richard. Sarah and Richard exchanged a moved look. Tyler had found the right words. Ryan would always remain the daddy in heaven, and Richard was becoming Papa Richard, a unique and precious place in the child's heart. The wedding preparations were simple but moving. Richard and Sarah wanted an intimate ceremony centered on their love and their blended family. They chose to marry in a small church in Brooklyn Heights, near the restaurant where Richard had proposed. The day before the wedding, Richard took Tyler to choose his suit. You know, my boy, tomorrow you won't just be my grandson. You will also be my adopted son. For real? For real. I've done all the legal steps. If you're okay with it, of course. Tyler thought seriously. Will Daddy Ryan be okay with it? Richard knelt before Tyler. I am certain of it. Your daddy wanted you to have a real family with people who love you. He will be happy to know you now have a Papa Richard to take care of you on Earth. Then okay. That way I'll have the last name of Daddy Ryan and Papa Richard. On the wedding day, Sarah was radiant in a simple but elegant dress. Tyler, proud as a peacock in his little suit, carried the rings on an embroidered cushion. Richard, moved to tears, had invited all his employees and a few close friends. On Sarah's side, there was Mrs. Garcia, her diner colleagues, and a few childhood friends. When the priest asked if they wanted to take Tyler as their common son, they both answered yes in firm voices. Tyler, unable to keep still, cried out, "Me too, I take you as my new parents." The whole audience laughed and applauded. It was an unconventional wedding but filled with authentic love. After the ceremony, they went to Greenwood Cemetery. Sarah had insisted on presenting Richard to Ryan as her new husband and father figure to his son. In front of the grave, they remained silent for a moment. Then Sarah placed the bridal bouquet on the stone. "Ryan, I officially present Richard to you, my husband. I know you approve. Watch over us from above." Tyler added solemnly, "Daddy Ryan, now I have Papa Richard to help me grow up, but you stay my daddy in heaven forever." Richard, tears in his eyes, whispered, "Ryan, I promise to cherish your family as if it were my own, because now it truly is mine." Leaving the cemetery, Tyler took Richard's hand and Sarah's. "Now we are truly a magic family. We have a daddy in heaven and parents on earth." Richard looked at his new wife and his new son, his heart full of gratitude. Life had taken Ryan from him, but it had given him Sarah and Tyler. He had become a father and a grandfather at once. Husband to an extraordinary woman, and builder of a project that would honor his son's memory. "Yes, my boy," he said, squeezing the hands he held. "We are a magic family." And for the first time in years, Richard Harrington felt complete. The future opened before them, full of promise and common projects. The Ryan Harrington School would open its doors in 6 months. Sarah would soon finish her training, and Tyler would grow up surrounded by love and security. The pain of losing Ryan would never completely disappear. But it was now soothed by the joy of this new family that perpetuated his legacy of love and generosity. 2 years after their marriage, the Harrington-Thompson family lived in a quiet happiness that sometimes seemed unreal to Richard. The Ryan Harrington School had been open for a year and a half and was experiencing success that exceeded all their expectations. Sarah, graduated with honors, led the establishment with a passion and competence that impressed even the education officials. Tyler, now 8 years old, had become a flourishing and curious little boy who naturally juggled between his life as a traditional schoolboy and his role as a junior advisor at his parents' school. He had a particular ease in explaining to other children the financial concepts he was taught, using simple words and examples from his daily life. "Papa Richard," Tyler said one morning while eating breakfast in their new apartment in Upper East Side, "can I bring Thomas to school today? He can't understand why his parents are always arguing because of money." Richard put down his newspaper and looked at his adopted son with tenderness. "Of course, my boy. You know the school is open to all children who want to learn." Sarah, who was preparing her things for a meeting with the school's board of directors, smiled hearing this conversation. Tyler had naturally developed that social empathy. Ryan possessed the ability to identify others' problems and want to help them. "In fact," Richard continued, "I have a surprise for you both." "A surprise?" Sarah and Tyler exclaimed in unison. Richard pulled 2 envelopes from his briefcase. "Sarah, the Department of Education wants to award the Ryan Harrington School the prize for pedagogical innovation. And you, Tyler, you have been selected to represent the school at the award ceremony." Sarah put her hands to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. "Richard, it's incredible. Ryan would have been so proud." "I'm going to make a speech in front of officials?" Tyler asked, half excited, half terrified. "A short speech, my boy. You'll just tell what the school taught you and why it's important." Tyler thought seriously. "I could say that thanks to Daddy Ryan's school, now I know why Mommy and Papa Richard never argue about money." Richard and Sarah exchanged a moved look. Tyler's innocence always hit home. That day at school, Richard watched Sarah lead a meeting with the teaching team. In 2 years, she had become a true head of establishment, respected by her colleagues and adored by the students. The school now welcomed 80 children aged 6 to 16, all from disadvantaged backgrounds, who learned the basics of financial education alongside their normal school curriculum. "Madam Director," said Sophie, the young teacher responsible for the youngest ones, "the first-grade children have created a small fictional market in class. They buy and sell objects with fake money, and they already understand the notions of saving and budgeting. Sarah smiled, proud of her team. Excellent. That is exactly the spirit Ryan wanted, learning while having fun. And the teenagers? Richard asked. They are working on a business startup project, replied Mark, the middle school teacher. They have to present a complete business plan by the end of the month. Some have remarkable ideas. Like what? Sarah asked. Aisha wants to create an app to help immigrant families understand the banking system. Karen imagined a tutoring service where high schoolers teach middle schoolers for pay, thus creating a student microeconomy. Richard nodded, impressed. These children are brilliant. Ryan would have been marveled to see his ideas come to life this way. After the meeting, Richard and Sarah walked through the school hallways. The walls were decorated with student projects, photos of Ryan, and a large mural representing the school's family tree with Ryan as the root, Sarah and Richard as the trunk, and all the students as branches and leaves. You know, Sarah said, stopping before Ryan's portrait in the entrance hall. Sometimes I feel like he's here, supervising everything we do. I feel the same way, Richard admitted, especially when I see Tyler explaining something to the other children. He has exactly the same gestures as Ryan. They were interrupted by bursts of laughter coming from the playground. Through the window, they saw Tyler at the center of a group of children, gesturing with animation. He was clearly explaining something important, and they all listened religiously. What is he telling them? Sarah whispered. They approached the open window discreetly to hear. So Papa Richard, he explained to me that when we have money, it's not to keep it all to ourselves like a dragon on its treasure. It's to help others have some too. That's why we created the school with Mommy Sarah and my daddy Ryan in heaven. He had this idea because he wanted all children to understand money so they wouldn't be afraid. Then a little girl raised her hand. But Tyler, what's the difference between being rich and being greedy? Tyler thought seriously. Well, being rich is when you have a lot of money. Being greedy is when you have a lot of money but you don't share anything. Papa Richard, he is rich but not greedy because he shares everything with us and with the school. And are your parents rich now? A boy asked. Mommy says we're rich in love and projects. And Papa Richard, he says we're rich because we do useful things with money. Sarah discreetly wiped a tear. He understood everything, she whispered. Like his father, Richard replied, his voice choked with emotion. That same evening, the family was dining quietly when Richard received an important call. It was the mayor of Queens. Mr. Harrington, I'm calling to tell you some excellent news. The city wishes to name the street where your school is located Ryan Harrington Way. We would like to organize an inauguration ceremony next month. Richard looked at Sarah and Tyler, his heart swelling with pride. Mr. Mayor, we would be honored. When he hung up, Tyler asked, What was it, Papa Richard? They're going to give your daddy Ryan's name to our street. Tyler jumped from his chair. For real? So now our school will be at number so-and-so Ryan Harrington Way. Exactly, my boy. Can we go tell Daddy Ryan at the cemetery? Sarah and Richard exchanged a look. This habit of talking to Ryan at the cemetery had never ceased. Every Sunday, they went as a family. Tyler telling about his week, Sarah explaining the school's evolution, and Richard sharing his thoughts on education and family. Of course, Sarah replied. We'll go Sunday as usual. The following Sunday, as every Sunday for 3 years, they went to Greenwood Cemetery. But this time, there was a difference. Arriving at Ryan's grave, they discovered it was decorated with flowers, not by them, but by someone else. Who brought these flowers? Tyler asked, intrigued. A voice behind them answered, It was us, Tyler. They turned and saw Acha, the 15-year-old student from the school, accompanied by several other students. Acha? Kareem? What are you doing here? Madam Director, we came to thank Mr. Ryan. Thanks to his school, my family now understands how to save for my university. And Kareem, he convinced his parents to open a savings account instead of keeping the money under the mattress. A small boy from Tyler's class stepped forward timidly. Mr. Harrington, I learned to count change thanks to the school. Now when Mommy buys groceries, I help her check that we get the right change. Richard felt his eyes cloud over. Children, you didn't need to come here. Yes, Acha said firmly. We didn't know Mr. Ryan, but it's thanks to him that we have a chance at a better life. He deserves to be thanked. All the children approached the grave and spontaneously began to tell what the school had brought them. Tyler, proud as a peacock, translated his classmates' words for his daddy Ryan. Sarah and Richard, hand in hand, observed this incredible scene. Ryan's dreams had become a reality beyond anything he could have imagined. You know, Sarah whispered to Richard, I think we succeeded. Ryan wanted to change the lives of underprivileged children. Look at them. Richard nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. And you, Sarah, are you happy? Sarah turned to him, smiling. Happier than I would have ever dared hope. I have a job I love, a wonderful son, an extraordinary husband, and I realize the dream of the man I loved every day. How could I not be happy? The children eventually left, leaving the family alone with Ryan. Tyler placed his weekly drawing on the grave, a tradition that had never stopped. Daddy Ryan, he said solemnly, this week I learned a new important thing. Papa Richard explained to me that money is like seeds in a garden. If you plant them and take good care of them, it grows lots of beautiful things for everyone. Richard smiled. He had used that metaphor the previous week to explain investment to Tyler. And you know what, Daddy Ryan? I think you planted the most beautiful seed of all the school. And now it's growing and making lots of other beautiful things grow. Sarah discreetly wiped her tears. Tyler had found the right words, as he often did. Leaving the cemetery, they passed a woman in her 50s carrying white flowers. She stopped, recognizing Richard. Excuse me, are you Mr. Harrington? Yes, ma'am. I am Sarah Moreau. My daughter Lee has been at your school for 6 months. Richard smiled. Ah yes, Lee, a very intelligent little girl. Mr. Harrington, I wanted to thank you. Lee talks to me about the school every night. She understands now why we can't buy everything she wants. But she also understands how to save for what is truly important. The other day, she even advised me on an investment for her future studies. Sarah intervened. Mrs. Moreau, that is the goal of the school. That children become financially responsible adults. Well, it's a success. Lee now wants to become a money teacher, as she calls it. She wants to help other children understand. Tyler pulled on Richard's sleeve. You see, Papa Richard, Daddy Ryan's school makes seeds grow everywhere. Returning home, they found an invitation waiting for them. UNESCO was inviting the Ryan Harrington School to present its program at an international symposium on financial education for youth. Sarah, Richard said, do you realize? Our little neighborhood school is going to be presented to the world. Not our school. Richard Ryan's, yours, mine, Tyler's. And that of all those children who find their voice there. That evening, while they tucked Tyler in, he asked them a question that surprised them. Papa Richard, Mommy Sarah, do you think I'll have children one day? I hope so, my heart, Sarah replied. Why? Because if I have children, I'll tell them the story of Daddy Ryan who had a great idea, of Grandpa Richard who realized it, and of Mommy Sarah who led it. And I'll tell them that in our family, we help others with money. We don't just keep it for ourselves. Richard felt his heart swell with pride. You know, Tyler, I think that is the most beautiful lesson your Daddy Ryan could have hoped to transmit. And you know what? When my children go see Daddy Ryan at the cemetery, they can tell him that his school still exists and that it's still helping children. Sarah and Richard looked at each other, moved to tears. Tyler had understood the essential. Ryan's legacy wasn't made of stone and metal, but of values, love, and generosity that would be passed down from generation to generation. Yes, my boy, Richard whispered. Daddy Ryan's school will always exist as long as there are people like you to understand his message. A few months later, at the UNESCO ceremony, Tyler, now 9 years old, stood on stage before hundreds of educators from around the world. In his little suit and with natural confidence, he told the story of the Ryan Harrington School. Ladies and gentlemen, he began in a clear voice, My name is Tyler Harrington Thompson. I'm going to tell you the story of my daddy in heaven who had an idea to help poor children understand money. In the audience, Sarah and Richard held their breath. My daddy Ryan, he died before I was born, but he had dreamed of a special school. My grandpa Richard and my mommy Sarah, they realized his dream. Now our school helps lots of children understand that money isn't bad or good, it's just a tool. And that when you know how to use it, you can help others and be happy. Tyler paused and looked at the room. You know, in my family, we say that money is like water. If you keep it in a glass, it goes bad. But if you let it flow, it waters the gardens and makes beautiful things grow. Our school is a garden where we learn to make the water flow so everyone can grow. The room was silent, captivated by the simple but profound words of this 9-year-old child. I wanted to say thank you to Daddy Ryan who had the idea, to Papa Richard who realized it, and to Mommy Sarah who leads it. And above all, I wanted to say that if we children learn well, we can create even more schools like that all over the world, because all children deserve to understand money so they won't be afraid of it anymore. Tyler finished his speech to thunderous applause from the entire audience. Several countries immediately asked to visit the Ryan Harrington School for inspiration. Returning to New York, the family made a detour to the cemetery. Tyler proudly placed his UNESCO medal on Ryan's grave. Daddy Ryan, your school is now known all over the world. People from many countries want to make schools like ours. You can be proud. You're going to help children all over the planet. Richard and Sarah stood embraced, watching their son speak so naturally to his biological father. This blended family born from a chance encounter in a cemetery had become something magical. You know, Richard whispered to Sarah, the day I found you in tears on this grave, I never would have imagined we'd end up here. Me neither, Sarah replied. But I think Ryan planned it all. He arranged this meeting from above. Do you really think he sees us? Tyler asked, turning back to them. Richard and Sarah exchanged a knowing look. Yes, my boy. I am certain he sees us and that he is proud of us. Tyler nodded and smiled. Then he knows we're the most beautiful family in the world. The most beautiful family in the world, Richard repeated, hugging Sarah and Tyler to him. As they left the cemetery, a light breeze made the leaves dance on Ryan's grave like a final sign of approval. The Ryan Harrington School would continue to grow, to spread, to change lives. And Tyler, bearer of this triple heritage, Ryan's idealism, Sarah's determination, and Richard's generosity would pass these values on to future generations. The story that had begun with tears on a cold grave ended in the joy of a united family and in the hope of a world where financial education would allow all children to build a better future. 5 years later, when Tyler was 14, he created his own association to teach financial education to refugee children. The Ryan Harrington School had opened 3 branches in the United States and inspired the creation of 15 similar establishments across the country. And every Sunday, without exception, the Harrington Thompson family continued to go to the cemetery to tell Ryan the new chapters of this beautiful story he had initiated with his dreams and his vision of a fairer world. For true love, the kind that unites a family, knows neither the boundaries of death nor those of time. It is transmitted, multiplied, and makes the most beautiful human projects flourish. Thank you for following this story of love, family, and generosity to the end. If this saga moved you, feel free to leave a like to support this kind of hopeful narrative. And tell me in the comments, what did you think of this beautiful blended family and Ryan's legacy? Do you think financial education can truly change